So this picture was taken in 1969. How do you like that? Most of you weren't even born yet. 54 years ago, a boy and his dreams. I had some fish in that tank, convicts, a cichlid, which I bred. It was about the time I caught my first garter snake. If you'd have told me then that I'd have all the boa constrictors I had now, I would have been ecstatic. I would have been crazed with excitement. And yet, here we are. So this is the scene that Jonathan Bannister found in his cage that his Peruvian Red Tail Boa had given birth to in 2012. Jonathan Bannister acquired this female from a guy who had it advertised on Craigslist. Actually, he'd advertised some hypos on Craigslist and some cages. He went to the guy's house, bought the cages, and bought the hypos. And the guy said, "Oh, by the way, I've got this Peruvian Red Tail Boa in this glass tank, and I'm afraid of it, and she's mean, and you can just have it if you want it." And Jonathan looked at her. She was stuck in probably multiple sheds, he said. Very skinny, in an outbuilding where she wasn't heated properly and just not in very good condition. But Jonathan took her anyways. Nursed her back to health, fed her like crazy, and this is a picture of her gravid after Jonathan had bred this Peruvian to one of those hypos. So he was pretty excited. He's going to have some babies. Jonathan Bannister, complete newbie at keeping boas, but very enthusiastic. So she gave birth. Whoa. This is what she gave birth to. So Jonathan was confused. Well, not really confused, but ecstatic with the litter that he had, and he posted pictures of it on Facebook. Well, I saw the pictures on Facebook with these big yolk bellies, and he's inquiring what in the world's going on. Patternless boas. Very excited. So I asked him to contact me. You can see the little Peruvians alongside the patternless babies. These were on the early side because you can see the large, thick umbilicuses and lots of yolk, primarily outside the body, which in some cases is better for them than inside the gut. And I got him on the phone and explained to him I thought that this was probably parthenogenesis, and that the mother had reproduced these babies without a contribution from the male, the hypo male, that he had tried to breed to it. Well, Jonathan didn't know a lot about this. He was pretty inexperienced, a novice boa guy. He's pretty experienced at this point and an accomplished breeder. Made one of the best litters of the year this year, VPI Snow Stuff. But at this time, it was just all new. And I was very excited for him that this had happened, and excited to see that this Peruvian Red Tail Boa had this partho litter, because I knew what that meant. That meant Jonathan Bannister had a Peruvian Red Tail Boa that was het patternless. That was exciting. Here's some of the Peruvians and one of the patternless. So Jonathan tried to raise these babies. They were all females, as is always the case when you produce a partho litter, or babies produced via parthenogenesis. None of them were hypo, so it appears that nothing was produced sexually. And they all died over the next month or two. They just died off, which is typical result you get with partho litters. Partho babies, or baby boas produced via parthenogenesis, most of the time are very weak, do not do well. That was the case with these boas that Jonathan Bannister had produced. The Peruvians, as well as the patternless. because all of these babies are homozygous for every single trait all along the DNA string, which is a very, very negative result. It results in very, very weak babies because it's the ultimate inbreeding. You know, you've inbred yourself, basically. I'll explain more about that. But I was excited, and then several months after he had this litter, he got called up to go to Afghanistan. He is a Navy medic to serve our great country, which he did, and contacted me and said, "Hey, are you interested in this female Peruvian?" I thought, oh, absolutely I'm interested in this female Peruvian, because I would love to breed that to a Peruvian and make het for patternless Peruvians, which is what I set about doing. So I obtained this female after she had had this Partho litter with Jonathan Bannister, and all those babies died. And I set about breeding that animal so I would make hets, or actually possible hets, that I could breed to one another and take the long road to seeing a project through and making some really, really cool babies. That was 2012. This is their mom, after I had her for a period of time and had fed her quite a bit. And I bred her with a Peruvian Red Tail Boa male in 2013, going into 2014, and that baby, or that litter, was born September, I believe it was September 20th of 2014. Here's where she was gravid, May the 13th. I posted this on Facebook, saying I was looking forward to producing 50% possible het for patternless Peruvians. These are the puppies that I made with that breeding, and the baby Peruvians I produced. So I was on the long road to proving this out and making some of my own patternless Peruvian red tail babies. So these are 50% possible het for possible het for patternless, but Peruvians, because the male that I used was a Peruvian that Derek Yagi had produced. Those came from Pucallpa Peruvians, which I had gotten from a guy who went to jail for smuggling them in the 90s and up to 2000. It wasn't all the way to 2000, but I had acquired a lot of Boas from this guy, who he assured me were legal declared animals, and apparently they weren't, because he ended up going to jail for it. And I'd gotten probably 100 Peruvians or so from him, from Pucallpa and from Iquitos. So I'm very familiar with them. And this particular Peruvian female, the guy that Jonathan Bannister got it from, the day he picked it up, he told Jonathan that it was a Peruvian import. And Dr. Warren Booth, who's an associate professor at Virginia Tech, a very prestigious college, and he's a geneticist. In entomology is his urban entomology is his specialty. But he's a Boa guy. He's one of our guys. He had seen that Boa while the other guy had owned it as well, and he had told Warren that it was a Peruvian. He had seen it several times, so he knew of this animal and that it was a Peruvian as well. So these are some of those babies that I produced in 2014, right after I'd produced them. The reverse tail has nothing to do with patternless. The father had a reverse tail stripe, which is why I used it, because I just thought it was cool. So a number of the babies got the reverse tail stripe, but half of these babies, presumably statistically, would be het patternless. Half of them would not. So my goal was to try to pick out the ones that I thought actually were het patternless, which proved to be complicated but working at it, and with some level of success. This is one of those babies. About 3 years ago, one of those Peruvian babies that I made in 2014. There's another one. And another one. And another one. So I kept 3.6 from the litter, which I didn't try to breed until they were 8 years old. I didn't raise them very quickly. And this year they turned 9. And this year was the first year I bred any of them successfully, and had my first litter of them about a month ago now. So yeah, I'm not sure what the date was. I should know that, but around the 1st of August, or very close to the 1st of August. Born 115 days after the post-ovulation shed. And here's some of them in the cage when I was trying to breed them. Here's one of them, actually the first one that gave birth while she's gravid. Before June 30th. She's due July the 10th. 10 days away. Looking pretty good. Going to make some legendary puppies. Oh yeah. Well, today is day 115 after this Peruvian Red Tail had her post-ovulation shed. She's done. She's excited. And so am I. I love it when a plan comes together. What have we here? So here they are. First litter from a 50% possible het, patternless Peruvian, bred to a 50% possible het. I got 13 babies. 6 of them are patternless, so almost half, which is a really good number. And the rest are just, you know, garden variety Peruvians. Which I'm pretty happy about. It's a pretty good day. July the 25th. Oh, happy day. So needless to say, I'm pretty stinking excited. Proved out a simple recessive after getting a glimpse that the mother, Peruvian Red Tail, was het for patternless when Jonathan Bannister had a Partho litter with a bunch of patternless babies in it. Parthos, which are all females and did not survive. I have males and females in this litter, breeding 2 possible hets together. And this is all of the non-patternless Peruvians and the patternless. We'll show more post-shed and live. Well, live on video in a moment, but wanted to show these pictures from the day that they were born. I was very, very happy. So I feel like I need to give a little bit of a refresher on parthenogenesis, because a lot of people probably aren't very familiar with parthenogenesis and what that means. So in typical breeding, in sexual reproduction, a male contributes sperm, which has half of the DNA, and the female develops an egg, which has the other half of the DNA. Those two halves join together, and that original single egg single cell within the ova begins to divide and multiply. So you get identical copies of the DNA information contributed, half from mom, half from dad, in each one of the cells in the embryo, until ultimately it becomes a baby boa. So in parthenogenesis, what happens is, and we don't know why, but sometimes the female will send the ova down the oviduct when there isn't any sperm there waiting to fertilize the eggs. Or maybe there is, but for some reason the sperm does not fertilize the eggs, or doesn't fertilize all of the eggs. So some of the eggs can go through this parthenogenesis process, or all of the eggs can go through the parthenogenesis process. It can happen either way. So you can have a litter of babies where you get 20 babies that are sexually reproduced, that got a contribution from the male and mom and the female, and you get 2 or 3 or 4 that were produced via parthenogenesis. So some of those eggs, when it's parthenogenesis, those eggs only have DNA from mom, but for some reason that genetic information doubles up on itself. That's probably not the right term, but instead of getting the contribution from the male, it makes a duplicate of its own DNA. So a parthenogenically produced baby is homozygous for every single trait all along the DNA. So in that case, if the egg happened to carry the gene for albinism, for instance, a parthenogenic reproduced baby from that would also carry the albino gene, but it would carry a matched set because it's homozygous for every single trait. So if the egg is het or carries the gene for albino, and het for anarthristic or carries the gene for anarthristic, it's going to be homozygous for both of those traits, so it's going to be albino and anarthristic, or a snow. So in the case of this particular Peruvian female, she had this partho litter. All of the babies were homozygous for the traits that they inherited from the mom. So the mom, because she is het for patternless, which the partho litter proved, and my additional breedings have proven, about half of those babies would get that patternless gene. And if they got that patternless gene and it wasn't, that half of the DNA was not met up with a half from the male via regular sexual reproduction, and it doubled over on itself, then it would be homozygous for patternless. So that's how this original litter that Jonathan Bannister had in 2012 produced this litter of partho babies. Now, interestingly, that particular female is the same female that produced patternless boas in North Carolina in 2006. So there were 5 or 6 patternless babies, and they were said to be super harlequin. Yet they didn't have any contribution from a harlequin because they were likely, unproven, but they were likely partho babies from that female Peruvian without any contribution from the male. None of those were hypo either, and ultimately those all died without being reproduced. So that, interestingly, that's part of the reason. Well, that's anyways, that's something that Jonathan Bannister found out when he picked up this female, is that this Peruvian import was the mother of those patternless boas. But she's a Peruvian, and so she has no Colombian blood in her. She has no harlequin blood in her. Those babies were produced in about 2006. She was imported in about 2000. Now, some people say, well, they could be the same as Sterling's. It could be the same gene. It could be the same gene, but it's a different locality. So it doesn't matter to the people who don't care about locality it doesn't matter if it's the same or not. You already have Sterlings, right? For people who care about locality, this is very important because they don't want to bring in other genes from other localities, like Colombian, into Peruvians to make something that's half Peruvian and half Colombian with some mutation. They pretty much just want to breed Peruvians to Peruvians, which I have never bred anything to a Peruvian but a Peruvian. Peruvians are my first love in Boas, and it's not something I would ever do. So the Sterlings can't be Peruvians either, because Ken Baumgarten, who made the first Sterlings, got them from a guy who just had some baby Boas in New Hampshire, and those babies were born before this Peruvian was producing. And the Peruvian, we don't know how many times she bred for the guy in North Carolina. May have only been once, may have been more than once. We don't really know. So there may have been other Boas that were produced from that line, from that female, but we don't know. But they weren't Kens. So Kens can't be Peruvians because they're not from the same, it's not the same heritage. So at any rate, I kept these, as I explained earlier, bred litter mates, which are 50% possible het. Now the way that works statistically, when you breed a 50% possible het to a 50% possible het, you only have a 25% chance that both animals you select are actually hets. So you got a 1 in 4 shot of hitting a visual, making homozygous animals. So I looked at them hard. I picked out what I thought were markers, and the first litter that I produced, even though I only had a 25% chance, I did get patternless Peruvians, which you're seeing and we'll see more of. The second litter, that female only produced 3 babies, 2 normal Peruvians, which were very, very small, preemies, and 1 patternless. So she was bred by the same male. So I have 1 male and 2 adult females that I've proven that I picked the right ones as hets. Now the third female I bred also had her litter the other day. She was bred by a separate male, and she had 7 babies. None of them were patternless. So that doesn't prove anything, because only 1 out of 4, if I picked them right, only 1 out of 4 of those offspring would be patternless. So you can't tell by 6 or 7 or 8 babies. You don't know. So I'll need more breeding trials on that. I've got 1 more female gravid. She's in this cage right here. She's due on the 25th. She doesn't look any better than the one that just had the babies, so I'm expecting kind of half a litter of babies, half a litter of slugs, hoping I get to see at least a patternless out of that litter, and that will prove that the male that I used was, and that this female is het. But jury is out. We'll see when we see. So at any rate, that's kind of the upshot and the story of it. And I decided that I wanted to give these guys a cool name, something other than, you know, Daffy Duck Boa or Highway Boa or whatever the goofy names that are left. So I called a friend of mine, Alex Caratala. He's from Miami, and a true red tail guy, big Suriname guy that I've known for 20 years. And I told him I wanted to think of a name that was in Spanish. He speaks Spanish. He's Cuban. And he suggested the name, after doing a little research, he suggested the name Bacàno. So Bacàno, what is that? Well, that is a slang term used in Peru and Colombia that means awesome or cool or the ultimate. It's just kind of a slang word. So Bacàno it is. So we're calling these the Bacàno Boa, the first patternless Peruvian, proven here in this cage right here on July 25th, so a few weeks ago. And I'll have some more video. I'm going to show the puppies. You're going to get to see them here shortly. Stay tuned. here they are. This is the post-shed litter of Bacàno Boas, or patternless Peruvian Red Tails, and Peruvian Red Tail babies. These are the babies. Pretty cool, huh? Some are lighter than others. I like them. They're gigantic. I'd show you alongside my hand, but sorry. Gargantuan hand makes them look small. They are huge. Huge babies. Anyways, pretty excited. It's a good day for boa breeding, and the true red tail guys that aren't gonna mind working with a true red tail mutation should be pretty enthused as well. Pretty exciting. They're live. Pretty cool.